get started. Just gonna get everything set up. All right, getting everything set up here, people. And should be ready in a couple minutes. Enjoy this track by Set Typhoon, I Am That I Am. Pop away joint in there.
Consider the brain, call it the third eye. So commence brain, mind over matter. You convince yourself to worship outside yourself. It's not a religion, it ain't no correspondence. This is why believers can't internalize shit. Y'all praying and praying, hoping some miracle change your condition. Meanwhile, you know, you walk your life with contradiction. I don't play with my will. Will from the heart, I just where the ego. I am that I am, so the soul sent me to speak unto you. I came from out the dark with a spark, the light up. I tell the children and been sold amongst the pit. Give the people a warning about existence with no spiritual meaning. My body and soul to reality, just as much as one pathology. When you know yourself, out about nobody else. All programming is excluded, all studies is included. Gotta challenge yourself to thought you know it's just stupid. I am that I am, that I am. Now that's fluid. I be talking in Chris, those people keep you in your 66 books. Like swipe, gotta look back, always gotta take a second look. Think not that I come to see peace on the earth, I come out to see people but a sword. I challenge myself with the task to leave no stone unturned. So I don't give a fuck if you get offended because I speak to God, so I'm finished. I'm like a Galactus. I spend my time doing stuff shit like that here. I am that I am, 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 that I am. I am that I am, that I am, that I am. I am that I am, that I am, that I am. I am that I am, that I am, that I am. I am that I am, that I am, that I am. I am that I am, that I am, that I am. I am that I am, that I am, that I am. I am that I am, that I am, that I am. I am that I am, that I am, that I am. What am I? When am I? How am I? Who am I? I can't. God is man. I am that I am, that I am, that I am.
Play that again. You guys see that? That's the brother Set Typhoon, I Am That I Am. I'm gonna play that again. Just sent me that track. So let's hear that again. Finish doing this.
So commence brain, mind over matter. You convince yourself to worship outside yourself. If it not a religion, it ain't no correspondence. This is why believers can't internalize shit. Y'all praying and praying, hoping some miracle change your condition. Meanwhile, you don't get it with will. Your life a contradiction. I don't play with my will. Will from the heart, I just where the ego. I am that I am, so the soul sent me to speak unto you. I came from out the dark with a spark, the light up. I tell the children their intention is their soul amongst the pit. Give the people a warning about existence with no spiritual meaning. My body and soul is a reality, just as much as one pathology. When you know yourself, not about nobody else. All programming is excluded, all studies is included. Gotta challenge yourself to everything you thought you know as if you do it. I am that I am, that I am. Now that's fluid. I be talking this Chris, those shit, most keep me in your 66 books. Like swipe, gotta look back, always gotta take a second look. Think not that I come to set peace on the earth, I come not to set peace, but a sword. I challenge myself with the task, leave no stone unturned. So I don't give a fuck if you get offended, because I tell you these thoughts, I'm finished. I'm like Galactus, I spend my time feeding off shit like that energy. I am that I am, 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 that I am. I am that I am, that I am, that I am. I am that I am, that I am, that I am. I am that I am, that I am.
All right, we're all set up here.
I am that I am, that I am, that I am.
We started in a minute.
I am that I am, that I am, that I am. I am that I am, 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 that I am. What am I? Where am I? How am I? Who am I? From whence I came. I'm called man. Airborne. I am that I am, that I am, that I am.
That was again the brother Set Typhoon, aka Maine. I am that I am. Got the little Popeye joint in there. All right. So I want to welcome everybody to the show. Special Monday night show. We usually don't do shows on Monday, but we have a special guest that'll be joining us shortly. The return of Dr. Edward Bynum. He will be in the building soon. All right, so we're just gonna wait for him to call in. I just wanted to get on here a few minutes early to get everything set up. We will be having a call-in number. You can call in when we get to the question portion of the show if you want to ask Dr. Bynum some questions, which I strongly encourage. Rather than just listening and not utilizing that opportunity to have the chance to talk with him. All right. Just a couple quick announcements I'm gonna run through. Again, we have the upcoming class on August 15th. Lucifer, the Dark Initiator. We'll be talking about various aspects of how to work with the masks of Lucifer. That class is open to anybody. All the information that you need to sign up for that class is posted on Primordial Chaos Instagram and Facebook. It's here in the community section of YouTube. Class is $55. It's from 3 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on August 15th. You just pay by PayPal. Please, in the PayPal notes, please include your email address and your name so we can get the link to the correct address, okay? If anybody is interested in a spiritual reading or consultation, I'm doing shadow readings right now, which is an intense reading. Just started that a few days ago, and people calling left and right about that, which is a good thing. Also doing telepathic readings or readings with the Holy Death. Again, just shoot me an email with the days and times you're available and the time zone you live in so we can make an appointment. All right. Also for the members of the Patreon page on Primordial Chaos on Patreon, we have the Kali Mantra ritual this coming Saturday at 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for levels tier 3, 4, and 5. If you haven't checked out the Patreon page, I encourage you to do so. Patreon.com/Beniti. All right. So I just want to run through those couple of quick announcements. We have the Hip Hop and Occult show. Next one will be the first Friday in August. We're going to be talking about Philly MCs and Philly rap groups and going through the Philly MCs. Brother Taza, who's from that area, will be adding his personal insight to that. That'll be a fun show. So looking forward to that. And that pretty much the basics. Quick ones I wanted to run through. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. The more likes the channel gets, it expands out and reaches more search engines. All right, so subscribe, hit the notification bell, hit the like buttons, and all that good stuff. All right. So think we are set. Let me just make sure we're good to go. Good to go there. All right. So it looks like we up and running. We're gonna wait for Dr. Bynum to call in, and then we're gonna get rolling. I just wanted to get everything set up. Looks like we good. Excuse me. Wrong pipe. Damn. Woo woo. All right. Just waiting for that call. Hope everybody's good. Where you at with all this crazy shit going on? All right. Looks like we good. I'm just waiting for Dr. Bynum to call. He's supposed to be calling in at 8:10. Should be any minute. Then we will get cracking here. Again, we usually don't do a show on a Monday night, but this is the day that worked out. So this is why we are here tonight. We'll be going live shortly on Facebook and Instagram once we actually excuse me, start with Dr. Bynum. I just don't want to go ahead. Especially with the Instagram, it runs an hour, then it cuts off. Yeah. All right. So we are good. So let's just see what we got in the room. Some shouts. Shout out to Brother Duma. See, he's in the room. You guys need to get with Brother Duma. Duma is the brother that makes the occult jewelry. I'm going to actually get him to come on, see if we can get him to come on Friday in the beginning of the show at least, talk a little bit about that. So inbox him if you are looking for a good occult piece. I definitely validate his work. I know some of you have reached out to him. If you haven't and you're looking for some good pieces, hit him up. Shout out to Brother L3, Virginia Green, Mandela Bourne. What's going on, brother? Hope everything is good. Are you here? Are you in Africa or are you home? If you hear me. All right. We're just waiting for Dr. Bynum to call in, and we are good. All right. We good. We up and running. We're just gonna wait a minute or two. So hopefully everybody's doing good. Are you in New Orleans? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm just gonna give it a minute, get everybody in here. And wait for Dr. Bynum to call in. Hold on one sec. Let me check something over here real quick. Hold on one sec. Make sure. All right. Got that up and running. All right. All right. We just waiting for Dr. Bynum, and then we're going. 8:10, it's 8:11. He should be calling in any minute. If not, I'll give him a buzz. But yeah, so hopefully everybody's doing good. Yeah, again, I know we don't usually come on a Monday night. Usually unusual. I ain't used to doing this shit on a Monday. But it is Monday, the fun day. Just waiting. I'm gonna give it another 5 minutes. Make sure he ain't having no problems getting in. There we go. All right. Greetings, Dr. Bynum. How are you? I am doing good. Good to hear your voice. All right, all right. Well, we want to welcome you back to the show. I know it's been a minute.
Well, I'm glad to be back. I got some exciting, my point of view, things to say, and part of it, I think part of it, due to you guys.
Okay, cool, cool. So if we can begin, and I want to first, for people that may not know you, I know some listeners are familiar with you, but I know we always have new listeners. So if you could briefly introduce yourself, Dr. Bynum, and tell the people what it is you do.
Yes. Well, for those of you who may be new, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, discipline, so on and so forth. But I'm also a psychologist and researcher, particularly in the area of ancient spiritual traditions, particularly those that come out of Africa, particularly Kemet and ancient Egypt, Kemet, and West Africa. And also, I have a deep and long-abiding interest in the clinical science behind many of our spiritual traditions, bringing in both the river of those experiences and the river of physical medicine and science. That is where my passion lies. And so that's what I've been doing. And as a result of that, I've been able to, fortunately, within years, write a series of books about this. And the most recent one is Dark Light Consciousness. But before that was the African Unconscious. And so that is a general overview of where I'm sort of coming from. And I really enjoy doing this because most recent one, Dark Light Consciousness, I think part of it due to your warm enthusiasm and the language, and the people talking about it, that it's become kind of a popular and moving out from under the underground, and that's very exciting. People starting to read it and talk about it amongst themselves, and so we're not underground as much as we used to be.
Okay. And I'm glad you said that. Also, I want to remind people, I know, Dr. Bynum, you mentioned the Dark Light Consciousness. I'm going to run through some of your books real quick. As I announced last week to the listeners and on the platforms, and just to remind everybody, if you can briefly let people know, it is also now available on audiobook. Do people know about that?
Yes. It's doing so well, particularly among the sort of cutting edge thinkers, Africans with a deep interest in spirituality and science, not one or the other, but the combination of those two. And as a result of that, the publisher said, well, this is taken off. You're onto something here. Right. And so I want to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to do that, because in large measure, I believe that this sort of conversation that we're having and other people tuning in and talking with other people about it, that's what is making this come alive. And I think our time has come. I look around and I see political developments going on. Correct. And it just reached a certain critical point. And now this, is beginning to happen. The whole Black Lives Matter movement is, from my point of view, the absolutely necessary exterior movement of the spiritual consciousness.
Right.
Dark Light Consciousness is Black Lives Matter in terms of the brain and the spinal cord of the spiritual tradition. And we haven't gotten to that yet, but I see it coming on the horizon.
Oh yeah. I appreciate you saying that. So I want to just to let the listeners know where they can get your books. And again, when I stumbled across your work several years back, I like to get you on the show because you've been influential personally to me, and I know many of the other listeners that watch the show. And Dark Light Consciousness obviously stands out. Not in addition, though, just to let the listeners know, I know that's probably the work that most people are very familiar with Dr. Bynum, but he has put out many books. He mentioned the African Unconscious. He has also put out The Dream Life of Families, The Roots of Transcendence. I'm just going to give you a couple. The Family Unconscious. Yes, I mean, you can see the list. You can go to Amazon.com, most of his books, and I believe Inner Traditions, that's your publishing company, correct?
Right. What's up, my publishing company?
Well, the way the books.
Put out the most recent one, Dark Light Consciousness and the Dream Life of Family.
Okay, all right. So yeah, you can definitely, also another good book that I would encourage people to check out, The Luminous Heretic. I mean, we need to maybe do a show on that one time. I know that's a book off the cusp. I've been meaning to get with you on that, but we'll talk about that another time. But I encourage people to definitely check out Dr. Bynum's work. And one thing that I've always felt was unique about Dr. Bynum, he combines, as he said earlier, the spiritual and the science, and even some of the medical and the physical, I think, which is important to have a combination of all that, which in my opinion, I think a lot of paths lack. So I just want to put that out there for the listeners. So let's get right into it. I do have some sections in the book, but I want to first get your take on, obviously, since the last time you came on, and just your take from what you're saying. From a spiritual perspective, obviously, there's a lot of things going on in the world. We know with the, you mentioned the movements that are going on. There's obviously a change in the air, in the ethers, as I like to say, and obviously with this pandemic. What is your whole take on that from a spiritual perspective, and what's your thoughts? I wanted to begin with that if we could.
Well, my thoughts about that, my impressions about that is that African American peoples, from the beginning of the current nation of the United States, that's going back to the early 1600s. I'm not talking about the folks who were here before that. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about when African Americans started coming here in large numbers. This is back in Jamestown, 1600s. Mm-hmm. Brought, I believe, a certain kind of ancient consciousness to the Americas. Some of them came to the Americas earlier than that as conquerors. We don't hear about that very much. There was an African presence in the Americas before the 1600s, and there was an African presence in Mexico, the old Mexican Empire, back in the 1200s. So Africans have been here in the Americas for a long time. The present incarnation of the quote United States, dating from the 1600s, brought a certain kind of consciousness. Many of those Africans who came here came with the divining chains around their neck, even though they were in chains themselves. And they brought a consciousness that has been primal and foundational to the American psyche. And it got more and more evolved and more developed through the antebellum times of, quote, slavery. And then after the, quote, Emancipation Proclamation, it went into another phase, and then another phase. But America, I believe, can measure its own spiritual development by how the African American mythos has manifested itself here in the Americas. And I believe that's part of our destiny as a people, is bringing spirituality and a certain kind of civilization to the world. We were the first peoples to civilize the earth. We all know that now. It's ancient history, ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet. Those are first civilizations, which then spread to other parts of the world. We were the first creators of organized spirituality, science, and religion. And now I believe humanity has reached a point where we're now about to take another huge, vast leap. And I believe the deep African core of all peoples is manifesting itself again. And the current political situation, from my point of view, is the latest chapter in that. I believe after Obama was elected, that issued a new one, and then there was the inevitable reaction to that, which is what we got in Trump. But that is going down. He's not going to make it. He's going down. We're going to see the unfolding of this in a higher and deeper way than we have before. So in many ways, despite the craziness that's going on, I remain very optimistic. I really do.
Okay, appreciate that. And the other thing I wanted I wanted to ask you, which is important, and obviously this is your profession. You're a medical doctor. You deal with psychological aspects. How are we to absorb all this now with everything that's going on? Obviously, people are looking at this differently. I know people who are, awake to what's going on. We're perceiving this, differently. We're taking it differently.
Sure.
What is your advice to people to make sure they keep that mental harmony? Because we know in these times people can, tap into serious levels of stress, mental issue. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that and what is your thoughts and advice on it?
I'm hoping that folks stay with their political and economic activity. I know this has been a huge setback for many of us in the African American community in particular. This coronavirus is taking us out at 3 times the level it's taking out white Americans. 3 times as many of us are dying because of this. That is reality.
Right.
And if it was the other way around, believe me, there would be all kinds of news, but it's mentioned every now and then. So we have to remember that we are going through another period of trial and development. And so no matter what your religious, spiritual, or even for that matter, political orientation, take care of yourself mentally by whatever you do, be it prayer, meditation, or some combination of those, but do that every day. Don't forsake that. All of this turmoil that's happening now, it's going to pass. And then something else is going to come in it. But your inner self, the you, that being behind the eyelids there, that being is going to be there no matter what.
That's right.
And I'd go further. That being behind the eyelids is going to be the being that one day closes its eyes on all of this stuff going on and is going to go on to something else. And so you need to be prepared for that. Consciousness, which I outlined in Dark Light Consciousness, and to some extent the African consciousness, certainly Dark Light Consciousness, your consciousness, not your me, your ego, but your consciousness existed before you were physically born. And your consciousness will exist after you are physically dead. I know that's a controversial one, but that is a medical situation that has been proved. I hope your listeners are hearing this.
Can you elaborate on that?
Before you are born,
Correct.
you are conscious.
Thank you. Can you elaborate on that? Explain that in detail, please.
Well, one of the things about one of the arguments about abortion, and I'm not taking a position either way on that.
Sure.
But about abortion, one of the things that bothers people so much is that they know that particularly in the 4th, 3rd, 4th month, that fetus is conscious. And they're not conscious in the way that you and I are conscious. In other words, they don't have words and ideas and concepts, but they have consciousness. Let me give you an example. Many of you are probably sitting at home in your living room or dining room, wherever it might be, and you have a pet. You have maybe a dog or a cat.
Right.
That dog or cat does not have words, okay? But it certainly is conscious, and it certainly has the capacity to have meaning. It understands. It doesn't understand in terms of words, but it understands. It has a certain consciousness.
Right.
And that's a dog or a cat. Let me bring it even further. If you have a child, an infant, that infant, when it is first born, it doesn't have words. It doesn't have concepts per se, but it is conscious. And then as it evolves and develops, the consciousness becomes more sophisticated and it begins to develop language, words, concepts, and so forth. But underneath all of that is still a consciousness. That consciousness, which is the essence of your consciousness, is compared to your physical birth,
And we know from near-death experiences, thousands and thousands and thousands of reports in hospital emergency rooms, operating tables, and so forth, that people have been clinically dead and then are resuscitated. They have been clinically dead, brain dead, heart stop for a period of time. I'm not talking about 10 seconds, a period of time. And then they are clinically revived. They describe the experiences of their consciousness beyond the physical body. Okay?
Right.
So I want this to be real clear to everybody here. I know that's controversial, but I'm out there about this. You exist as a consciousness prior to your physical birth. You exist as a consciousness after your physical death. So that is why you're developing a spiritual life in one way or another is really important, because that is how you continue to develop yourself as a being. That is how you develop yourself as a being. It won't be about concepts you have. It'll be about how your consciousness has evolved. And that consciousness is a mammalian consciousness. And it first reaches its human stage. It first reaches its human stage through the African template. Yes,
Right.
that African unconscious is
Right.
there. That African unconscious is there even in Trump.
Right.
He's just terrified of it. He just hates it. He
Yeah.
just hates it.
Yeah.
He
And-
just hates it. But it is there. And that is a testimony of modern genetic science, neonatology. That's there.
Now you touched on a good point, Dr. Bynum, and something I've been talking about where, melanated people can't get complacent, because one of the things I'm saying is a lot of these, I've been talking about it, these pacifying gestures, and I don't want people to get caught up on it, because I think to me, it's kind of insulting, taking Aunt Jemima off the pancake bottle, and I get it, but
it's a waste of precious energy.
Thank you.
That, while I understand it, can be much more focused on other kinds of things.
Right.
It really can.
Right. And
it really can. Plus, it's also endless.
Correct.
At some point, somebody in the movement, and it'll be an African American, by the way, somebody in the movement will look around and say, the more we think about it, the more passive Martin Luther King was.
That's right. That's right.
We need to take down the statues of Martin Luther King because he wasn't sufficiently aggressive.
I agree.
And active enough. Right? You can see it, right?
I agree. Yes.
Right. So let's stop this, okay? A certain amount of energy goes in there, yes. But remember the real thing. The real thing is getting the police off your neck.
Correct.
Making
Correct.
yourself economically independent.
Correct. And I've been talking about that.
Preparing yourself for present and the future.
Correct.
Because we have been doing this for ages. We have been doing this for ages. I want to communicate something, I hope, very clearly tonight to people. You are and it's been said many times, you are a spiritual being having a human experience, not the other way around.
That's correct. And
you are a spiritual being.
That's right.
Having a human experience.
That is correct. And that's important to understand. So let's do this, Dr. Bynum. It's been a while, and for newer listeners, let's rewind a little bit with the book, and obviously let's start from some of the beginning aspects. Explain how you came up with the title. Let's talk about what is dark light consciousness. Let's start there real quick, just to give people, your thought process of writing the book.
Well, a part of it is that the dark light consciousness is about the actual physical reality that you, I, and everyone who's listening right now lives in. The surface of your brain, my brain, everybody's brain is dark. Why is it dark? Because it's covered with neuromelanin. It's a certain kind of melanin. And that melanin absorbs light, and it transduces light to higher and higher levels to different states of expression. Okay?
Right.
But the surface of the brain, it's not because the sun is hitting it. It's got nothing to do with sunlight.
That's right.
It's because of its brain. And that dark surface of your brain is covered with neuromelanin and, importantly, certain critical areas within the brain core itself, thalamic regions and many others we could get into. There are specific areas in which there are dense concentrations in the basal ganglia of this dark matter, this dark living matter. And it focuses, amplifies consciousness, and it proceeds to surface the brain all the way down through critical areas within the brain core itself. Then it goes down and reverses itself down the brain stem until it goes down into the very center of the brain stem, almost all the way down to the base. Okay? All of our spiritual disciplines, yoga, meditation, Taoism, those are all about stimulating the spinal line. Why? Because we know that that is brain material. That is brain material. And we find different ways to stimulate it. One of the ways it's very popular stimulating that in the African and African American traditions is through call and response and dance. If you notice, particularly in Africa and the places where the African consciousness has spread to the western parts of the world, there's a certain kind of dancing that happens in which there's a lot of footstep movement and a lot of flexing of the lower spine. And that stimulating of the lower spine is actually a stimulus of that brain material to awaken an energy that the ancient Kemetic Egyptians referred to as the Uraeus.
That's correct.
The Uraeus serpent.
Yep.
In India, in Dravidian Indian, it was referred to as Kundalini.
Correct.
Okay? But
Yep.
that's what that is. And there is a genius in the African traditions of that we have been made fearful of. We have been made fearful of. But it is there, and it is more easily awakened in people of melanated skin. It's not because we're inherently more spiritual. No.
Right.
It's because it is easier to make that connection.
Correct.
But, just because you have dark skin is inherently more spiritual than anyone else. I like to point out to people here.
Please
that,
do.
Africans and African Americans also have committed horrific crimes in the past. Okay? A lot of folks think that the slave trade really took off because Europeans came in for Africa with all their guns and boats and everything else and grabbed things. No. They were brought from the interior of Africa to the coastline by other Africans.
Thank you.
Okay? Yes, they were.
Yep.
So let's get away from this thinking that just because we have dark skin, it makes us inherently more holy or anything else like that. No, it's not. What it does is it makes you able to make contact with the spiritual forces easier.
Thank you.
Okay? That it does.
Now,
And there are complicated neurological reasons for that
correct.
that have nothing to do with intelligence. It just happens to be the way certain parts of the brain are organized, particularly the pineal gland. In certain peoples, it tends to be calcified much more thickly. Europeans have a much deeper calcification of the pineal gland than Asians, and Asians have it more calcified than Africans. Africans have the least amount, or Africanated people have the least amount. And the pineal gland is associated with spirituality and every tradition. Okay?
That's right.
That's a whole other conversation. I just wanted to put that out there. Okay? So just because we're dark skinned does not automatically give you a leg up. But what it does do is it helps you enter into the unconscious, the deep unconscious easier.
Right.
A lot of folks, when they invade, well, let me say it this way. When the Europeans invaded Africa, first through Egypt, okay, during the time of the Greeks, around 300 BC or so, 3300 BC or something, when Alexander was there, they came and they learned an enormous amount. They learned about trigonometry. They learned about geometry. Because of mummification, they learned an enormous amount about anatomy and physiology, all from the Kemetic Egyptians. They learned all that. You know what they didn't learn? They didn't learn about the unconscious. Learn about that.
That's right.
Why do you think that is? That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were missing something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So that is what I'm trying to pick up on. And I know this is not a popular thing to say, but it is true.
True indeed.
And we have a responsibility to our children and a responsibility for the continuity of our ancestors to do this. We are our ancestors. We are our ancestors. And one day you will be in the future. Your consciousness is continuous. Your ego disappears, just like your body disappears. But your consciousness is not a physical phenomenon, folks. Brothers and sisters, your I'm not talking about your brain. I'm talking about your consciousness is not a physical thing.
Correct. Good point. Now, it's leading me to something, and I'll give you, because I got the hard copy in front of me, since we're talking about, this consciousness. And I think this is important. One, as we talk about with all the change going on, I mean, in my opinion, I've been talking about for a while, I think we have to let, old ways of thinking, they need to be released, because I think to understand some of this, I know you use the term like some of the stuff you might be saying is unpopular. In my opinion, I think some of it is from a lot of the indoctrination that we've been indoctrinated with over the years. And it's not to, quote unquote, attack any spiritual system, but I do think, we do have to, the way we think needs to change, number one, I believe, to absorb some of this. But what you talk about on page 57, this takes it to if you can talk a little bit about, and right there in the second paragraph, you talk about, you take a step further, the trans-dimensional self and mobile center of consciousness.
Yes.
Yes, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we did that before. It's called the trans-dimensional self and the mobile center of consciousness. By trans-dimensional, I mean this. All of us sitting down right now, or driving a car, whatever we happen to be doing, we're aware of 4 dimensions. You're aware of length, width, depth, okay, height, length, width, depth, those 3 spatial dimensions.
Right.
And you're also aware that, it's X o'clock, and at Y o'clock, you need to be somewhere else. So you're aware of the dimension of time. Okay, that's the fourth dimension. And then we know both from Einstein's relativity and your own dream life, that those 3 dimensions of space and the 4th dimension of time can get fused together in the dimension that Einstein referred to as space-time.
Right.
Okay? Space-time is.
Mm-hmm.
You know what relativity theory is basically about, because you know what space-time is.
Correct.
You also know that space-time is fluid. It shifts. When you're in a dream, you're aware that history from the past can get fused with things that are going on in the present, as you imagine things in, quote, the future, unquote. Space-time is very fluid. It's not a linear thing. And now we know that of those 4 dimensions, including space-time, there is a 5th dimension. And that dimension is light. Light is not contained in, but shines through those other 4 dimensions. And all your spiritual experiences, your deep spiritual experiences, they involve light. When you have an insight into something, it feels like you have an experience of light. When you have a high spiritual experience, it feels like an experience of light. When you are deeply in love, you have an experience of light. Okay? Right. So light itself, both objective light and subjective light, issues from the 5th dimension, so to speak. Okay? So yourself self, your deeper self, resides not in the three dimensions of space, or for that matter, the dimension of space-time, but in the dimension beyond that. That is what it means to be trans-dimensional. That is your inherent nature. And that trans-dimensional self is mobile. If you enter into a profound state of meditation or deep sleep without dreaming, but you are aware, or sometimes a state of profound insight where you realize that all of this is necessary, but is also an illusion. You have a direct experience of being in the fifth dimension.
Correct.
But by the way, in a curious little play on things, I always found it interesting that on the one hand, there was this guy, there was a colleague of Einstein's named Schwarzschild, who introduced the idea of the fifth dimension into physics, and just blew Einstein away because it solves a lot of equations.
Right.
Well, Schwarzschild is the German word for black child. Isn't that interesting?
That is
and of course,
interesting.
What was one of the great groups of the 60s and 70s? The fifth dimension.
Right, I remember. Sure, yeah.
So these kinds of things kind of run through the world, you know.
Yeah, I didn't even know that till you just brought that up. That is interesting, though. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now that you mentioned light, and I had this marked, I know a while back, I think we briefly talked about this one time before, but I kind of want to segue that in because of what you were just talking about. A little further up in the book, it begins actually on page 77. Tie that into, and I know we have an objective and a subjective consciousness, and we're talking about light, but tie in the dynamics of as you speak in the book, of objective light and subjective light. And can you explain the difference between the two, please?
Yes, and everyone listening right now knows exactly what that means. Objective light is the light that is, quote unquote, outside of you. Okay? You turn on the light switch, electromagnetic radiation. It can be measured. It's this amount of photons and quanta, so on and so forth. That's external objective light. You look at the sun. The sun is thermonuclear energy, blah, 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 blah. It is light. Right. Look at the stars outside. Know that is light. Right. Okay, in all of its forms. And we manipulate that light externally in our culture and in our civilization. Those are the external forms of objective light. Subjective light is a light that you experience when you're having an insight into something. Subjective light is when you have a profound spiritual experience and you have a sense of an insight literally flooding your inner world with a certain kind of awareness and light. Okay? All profound experiences manifest themselves in terms of internal light. So that's the difference between the external form of light and the internal form of light. They are not identical, but they both manifest out of the realm of fifth dimension of light itself.
So,
okay?
Right.
So everybody here knows what that is.
Right.
It's just a matter of just organizing in the way that you can perceive it.
Now, this subjective light, in your opinion and in your study, from a spiritual perspective and through our spiritual studies, our meditations, our ritual work, et cetera, that we do on our spiritual paths, in this subjective light or the ability that we can tap into, is there subjectively, is there any limitations when we're talking about being able to tap into that? Any?
Well, the limitations are apart. Some of the limitations are physical.
Okay.
In other words, that objective light is both objective and subjective within your own body. In other words, when we were talking earlier about melanin and neuromelanin, particularly neuromelanin, the melanin that is on the surface of the brain, the inner areas of the brain, and the deep inside of the spinal cord line itself. That is a source of both objective and subjective light. It can be measured, certainly,
Right.
but also your ability to perceive phenomena in the world is mediated by your ability to experience subjective light.
Right.
Okay, so it's both, and that's why I refer to it as dark light consciousness. Dark light.
Exactly.
It is both. Your entire brain, areas, many critical areas are about this living dark matter. The universe is made up of 93% of the universe that we know of today is made of an unseen, what's called cold matter. And also the critical parts of us are made up of a warm, living dark matter. At some point in our experience, our profound, deep experiences, those two meet. They meet and they structure our world. They structure our world. And again, as our consciousness evolved over the eons and we eventually got to the level of being human, that expressed itself exclusively in the first 3 million years through an African context. And then eventually we're going through the Australopithecine, those are pre-humans, and then Homo sapiens, Cro-Magnon, and eventually we got the Homo sapiens sapien. That's our species, thinking man. It's called Homo sapiens sapien.
Right.
And then for about 250 to 350,000 years, conservatively, that was all an African thing. And only in the last 25 to 30,000 years, only in the last 25 to 35,000 years has there been any change in that on the surface. And that is how we have the different branchings of the human family. Okay? But that's a new phenomenon. We've been this African-oriented, rooted thing for at least, in our present form, for at least the last 250,000 to 300,000 years. Only the last 25,000 have there been, quote, white people, quote, Asian people, quote, other kinds of people, but they're all rooted in African people.
Right.
And when you see someone who despises you, like, say, Trump, what he's doing is he's despising his deeper self.
That's right.
They
That's
despise their deepest self. And that's kind of sad. If you can have perspective, it doesn't make you passive. You still have your work to do in the world. You still have to get out on the line. You still have to protest. You still have to send in your money to get this person elected. You still have to do everything. But you can have some compassion for an ignorant person.
That's a good point. I want to back up because you were just talking about something that something you actually connected to something you were saying earlier. When you were mentioning how you broke down the different ethnicities and races and the pineal gland and the calcification of it. What can you share with listeners through your spiritual studies, through alchemy and studying hermetics? They talk about, the 7 operations of alchemy, and calcification is one of them. What spiritual practices, I know you get into some of them in the book too, but what spiritual practices or what suggestions in general would you suggest that people can do to utilize and activate that pineal or work that calcination process to get it more activated?
I'll be honest with you. It's to do that over a short period of time.
Right.
It would be hard to do that in less than a few years. What you can do, however, is be much more gentle and mindful of your diet, and over a number of years, you can decrease the amount of calcification over your pineal gland by bringing down many of the toxins in your body.
Okay.
I know that's hard to do, but if you take a long view. If you take the long view, and this is something I'm going to be doing for years and years and years, then you can gradually decrease the calcification, the detoxification of your pineal gland and other parts of your own body. Yes, you can. Don't let anybody tell you can't do that. Yes, you can, but it would take years and years and years. But it's really important to do. The pineal gland, you see, is, for those of you who may not know, the pineal gland rests between the right and the left hemispheres of your brain. Okay?
Right.
It goes down into close to the center of the brain, and it is light sensitive. It is photoactive. Way, way, way back in the evolution of different animals on planet Earth, the pineal gland used to be on the top of the head. Used to be on the top of the head.
Right.
And it was photoactive. And then over evolution, over millions and millions and millions of years, it sank deeper and deeper and deeper into the skull. And so finally we reached the mammalian line, and it is literally totally covered within the brain. But it remains, sensitive to light, photoactive, and that's why it is often referred to as the third eye. When we look at those headdresses of various peoples,
Right.
you notice that a lot of times the headdress is accentuating light or energy coming out of the head.
Correct.
If you look at the crown of the Kemetic Egyptian pharaoh, it usually has two uri or two serpents coming out of the very center where the third eye would be. That's
Correct.
when you go into a doctor's office, there's a symbolic representation of what happens when your energy ascends that spinal line we've been talking about and curves seven times around that spinal line until it finally reaches the top. And when it reaches the top, those two serpents, what happens to them? They transform and they sprout wings and they fly.
You're talking about the catechus symbol, right? The medical.
I'm talking about the medical caduceus. Yes.
Yeah, the caduceus.
That is a physical. That is an ancient Kemetic Egyptian African symbol for that very spiritual process. So every time you go into your physician's office and you see her, you're paying homage to that in a quiet sort of way.
Right.
And that is how deep. That's what I meant by the African is bringing a certain consciousness to the world again. These things go in great cycle. Your soul is an old soul.
Right.
The old soul that has been through many lives, many incarnations, and now you're doing this shit. Okay?
Right.
Keep moving, because your destiny is ultimately to be a being of that fifth dimension, that a being of light,
Right.
who lives through these four other dimensions, who is actually a denizen or a deeper dimension. And that is the message behind dark light consciousness. And literally, methodology, basic methodology of how to move toward that. It doesn't push off any other religious tradition at all. In fact, it hopefully tries to bring in all the others.
Correct.
Jesus the Christ talks about this. He talks about it in detail. You know, the one in the Bible and Revelations where they describe him as, feet the color of bronze and the hair like sheep's wool. That guy.
Right. Yeah.
Him. He talked about, be ye wise as serpents and harmless as doves.
There you go.
Be ye wise as serpents, harmless as doves. He's talking about that. He studied this. After 12 years old, he got on the trade routes with Nicodemus, and he was traveling until he came back around the age of 32. But he traveled to ancient Egypt. He studied in the temples of Egypt. He went all the way over the trade routes to India, and he studied yoga there. And then when he was ready, he came back to Palestine.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
So, yes. So, it's not some esoteric thing meant for way out there that doesn't have anything to do with you, or something that you only make contact with when you go to church on Sunday. No. Every time you go to sleep at night, I want all of you to hear this. Every time you go to sleep at night, you enter into the chambers of this deeper unconscious. Okay? And you may forget about it in the morning. If you can begin to prepare yourself, pray, meditate, whatever your tradition is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The main thing is that you do it.
Right.
and you do it with deep humility and honesty, and you will do it. You didn't get to where you are by doing nothing. You've been working on this for many lifetimes, thousands of years, thousands and thousands of years. I'm just simply trying to get you to keep doing it consciously.
That's right.
That's all I'm trying to do.
Right. Excellent. So I wanna go into chapter 3 because you you briefly mentioned earlier in the beginning. You alluded and were breaking down that brain stem in chapter 3, the spine, brain stem, and the deep brain core. If you could talk about that, it's important. There's a point of origin there. If you could elaborate on that brain, neuromelanin, and the triune brain, if you can kind of tie that in.
Yeah, what I was trying to do, and I went into some detail about this in the text, Dark Light Consciousness, and it's also easier to hear sometimes in the audio edition, perhaps.
Right.
But I wanted to firmly, clearly, and absolutely establish this as a physical, medical, and clinical reality. Okay, I'm aware that there are many different very good spiritual teachers out there, and with powerful material. I wanted to root this in clinical medical science. There are times when we have to talk about a necessity. We have to talk about quantum mechanics a little bit. We have to talk about string theory a little bit. We have to talk about neurology a little bit. But I needed to put this on a firm, solid basis, and it's beginning to pay off. It's beginning to pay off. It's beginning to sell, and it's beginning to move out of the underground, because millions of us are waking up to this, largely because they're listening to like universal minds. They're talking about it amongst each other by word of mouth, and we're becoming less and less afraid to talk about it.
Correct.
Where the consciousness is out there. One of the things that terrifies from the people like that is that African people are no longer scared.
Right.
They're no longer scared.
That's correct.
That's a terrifying thing. That's a terrifying thing. And behind that is going to eventually come the revolution in thought. And that's what we're talking about now, the revolution in thought and behavior, because the political challenge is waging right now, and we're going to win. I mean, history has indicated that.
Right.
We're going to win. But then what kind of spiritual revolution comes after that? And that's what we're talking about here. Because we're trying to awaken the African in all human beings. Because that is their fundamental consciousness also.
Correct. That's a good point. And I know you also mentioned, which, as you said, is in many traditions, spiritual paths, the awakening of the Kundalini, as many call it. Yeah. And in chapter 12, you have a great section in here on that, getting into detail, different principles, and then obviously you're giving a lot of information on awakening the sleeping serpent. And I know we briefly talked a little bit about this. If you can please explain again to the listeners how Kundalini energy, what it is, and how it's not always a pleasant thing. We could talk a little bit about waking the sleeping serpent.
Let me liken it to this. And this is just a crude analogy, but you can liken it to an electrical current, okay? And an electrical current goes through certain pathways through the wires, and the wires are covered, and so on and so forth. Okay, and you need that to have it be wired through the house, the car, whatever it is that you're using that uses an electrical current. Okay, so it goes through certain pathways. All right. Mm-hmm. Well, you need to know what those pathways are, because it would be highly dangerous and irresponsible simply to put the current through anything.
Right.
You could get yourself injured that way.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And so that's why you study the pathways, the neurological pathways to some extent, but more importantly, what it referred to as energy pathways, lines that the ancient Egyptians had their own names for it. The yogis have their own names for it. The people who study acupuncture have their own names for it. That key energy, it goes through definite pathways. It's not random.
Right.
Through definite pathways through the body. Well, in that Uranus, the big wire, so to speak, I'm simplifying that now. But the big wire, the big conductive wire is along the spinal line, particularly the internal spinal line, up through the brainstem and eventually through the brain core all the way to the surface of the brain in every area of the surface of the brain, the neocortex.
Right.
So that's the pathway. So it's just to be educated and to know where those pathways are so that you don't try and bring up a pathway that doesn't help you. And it is possible to do that. There are many different, what they're referred to in yoga as nadis.
Correct.
Different pathways to the subtle or energy body that if you go up the wrong ones, you get caught, so to speak, up there.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be quite painful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So that's why you just want to do your homework, be a good student, do your homework, be a good observer, study the text, talk with other people about it, don't do it in isolation, and you'll avoid those kind of mistakes because the mistakes can be quite uncomfortable.
That's right.
That's all.
Yeah. Okay.
That's all.
And
but but understanding the brain stem and the brain helped put the understanding I hoped of this phenomena in a sound clinical context because not only am I trying to obviously reach you and those who are listening right now, but I also have an agenda to reach medical and the clinical and scientific community.
right.
Because I want this to be stuff that we study in the medical schools and sometime in the future in our regular schools. This is the future of humanity.
That's right.
That's
correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
Science and religion are not enemies.
Right.
They are not.
Right. And later in that chapter, if you can elaborate on this, and I don't think this is talked about enough, and this was one thing when I first read the book that stood out to me. You elaborate on it in good depth. You talk about beyond, if you can explain how you explain it in the book, obviously briefly, beyond when the Kundalini is awakened, the process, what happens then, and what the student or the practitioner or the individual that's trying to master this, what lies ahead for them when that Kundalini or you're beyond it being awakened.
When the Kundalini has been awakened by that's certainly a beginning stage, and then she has to be, and it's always a she, by the way, has to be brought up through the appropriate channels along the spinal line, and there are several good channels. She's brought up, she has been awakened.
Right.
When she pierces each one of those zones, and those are often referred to as chakras, physiological basis for that also. But the point is that when she is finally reached to the center of the brain and then the brain core and then the top of the head, one has an experience of awakening or, quote, liberation, unquote. And one experiences one's own internal luminosity. Internal luminosity, I don't mean like it feels like it's stuck inside of your head. I mean that your whole head feels engulfed in an ocean of light, and there are no external boundaries. That makes any sense.
Yes.
It feels like light, and it is light, but it is intelligent light, but it is light without language. It comprehends meaning, for sure, but it is not conceptual meaning. It is more like apprehension, constantly being insightful. It's that kind of consciousness. And then it's capable of travel or movement. That's what I meant earlier, a mobile center of consciousness. And each one of us listening tonight has a brief hint of that all the time. Let me give you a really concrete example of that.
Mm-hmm.
When someone tells you a joke, and they're telling you a joke, okay? Because you're still saying anything that's funny. They are telling you a joke. They lead you along a certain line, and then when the joke comes, for a split second, you're thrown off key, off course, and you push it in the other direction. You, quote, get the joke, unquote.
Right.
For a split second, for a hair, a split second, it's not words, you have a pure insight. Got it.
That's right.
Pure insight.
They call it that
Right?
aha moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, imagine yourself going, constantly.
Right.
Well, you're not thinking in the conventional way. Your mind and brain are just illuminated, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That is as crude as that is kind of what that's like. You're
Right.
just constantly in the midst of insight. Whoa! That's what the Zen meditators refer to when they have, quote, enlightenment, Zen koan, leading to enlightenment,
Mm-hmm.
or the Kundalini has reached the brain, or maybe 1,000 other different ways of saying it.
Right.
That's what happens with us subjectively, psychologically, and physiologically also. It's a
Right.
constant state of opening and unfoldment.
Mm-hmm.
That is the destiny of our species. We are right now, we're predominantly a verbal and mental species. We haven't always been, you know. At one time, we struggled to think.
That's right.
You know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, we had a struggle as a little species to kind of like put thoughts together.
Mm.
We're running around trying to get some berries and hiding out from our predators, and it took thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years for us to kind of figure out that, you know, if we use this stick, we could kind of like dig in the ground and we could like dig up these roots that we could eat, you know?
Right.
And we kind of figured out kind of like, how many thousands of years did it take us to figure out that, you know, when you put these seeds in the ground and then you come back later, there's something growing there that we can eat.
That's right.
That took thousands and thousands of years to figure that out. And how many thousands of years did it take us to figure out that, yeah, we have sex with other people in our group, our tribe, and then a long time afterwards, a baby comes out. And it's something that I did.
Right.
Right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's paternity, you know?
Right.
It took us thousands and thousands and thousands of years to figure that out.
Wow.
So we haven't always been able to think. Now we think. And we're under the delusional belief that the only way to be is to think. At some point, we will move beyond conception as a way to be in the world, and we will live as beings of light and insight. That's our future. And the consciousness will lead the way to that. I really believe that.
Right. I agree.
And that is what I've tried to put out in Dark Light Consciousness. And I hope people pick up either a copy of that or, better yet, get the audio one, because, you know, a lot of us are driving to work. We're on the subway. We're trying to read at night. There's all kinds of. You put the audio book on, you just listen.
Right. And just so you know,
it's a lot more organized than I'm saying right now.
Right. And just so you know,
It's a lot
Dr.
more
Bynum,
organized.
some people have already, as the show has gone on, they've actually gotten the audio as we're doing the show, just so you know.
Yeah, you can just go on Amazon and get the audio edition or some other place or whatever, but and then share it among people. But it's beginning to happen. Again, the Black Lives Movement is fantastic. It is absolutely necessary and a long time overdue. It is the outer manifestation of our inner development as a people and as a leader of our species toward a new consciousness. And it's the African American and the African that is going to breach into a new level of consciousness that is collective. And we're going to move into gradually into not only this mental state, but eventually a super mental state. It is on the evolutionary track. It is on the evolutionary track.
Right. And what's your thoughts, Dr. Bynum? Two things. I have one more before I get to this. Speaking of the movement, what's your thoughts on some of these other groups that are using it as an agenda to hide behind and push these other movements? We see that happening in certain areas. What can be done, in your opinion? I know obviously we can't prevent that because we use things to hide behind a mask, because we do know there are some people out there and they have other objectives.
Of course.
Right.
Of course.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not. I can't and I won't say that certain things shouldn't be done. All I would say is they're like distractions.
I got you.
You know, when you sit in prayer and meditation, all kinds of thoughts come to your mind. Okay, and sometimes they're very interesting, and sometimes this, sometimes that. Well, that can't be avoided. All you're supposed to do gently is to bring yourself back to the central focus of your meditation. And that's all I ask people to do.
Right.
I say be political, because I'm political.
Right.
Okay, I am. I make my contributions. I do my walks. I do my talk. I mean, I'm out there.
Right.
Okay, but my primary thing is very selfish, and that is of developing my own consciousness, because I am very aware that I have a limited amount of time here. I want to make the most of it. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Okay, and so I'm doing it to the best of my ability. I know who's looking at me. You know, the ancestors are looking at me, so I had better do my shit, and I'd better do it well.
That's right.
And that's why I'm here on this earth.
Gotcha.
So, and I have a knack for being able to put this into words, and I have a background of training in the clinical and biological and medical to be able to pull this one off. Okay, so I'm doing it, and I was fortunate enough to be rejected.
Right.
I was fortunate enough to be rejected by different academic institutions because my work was considered too out there. Well, that was helpful for me in the long run because it made me free to write what I saw and what I see and what comes to me.
Exactly.
I'm grateful for that.
Right.
Okay.
And Dr. Bynum, that's what I was talking about earlier. How with the changes that are going on, like you use the example with your book, and how academic institutions rejected it because, quote unquote, really, I take that as what you're saying, it wasn't in line with mainstream. How do we approach changing that? I mean, I do see, there is a movement outside of the mainstream where people are waking up. People obviously are tired of, the nonsense. Yeah. But how, I mean, are you, what you're doing with your work, are you doing anything to change that, or are you just doing what you do and you're letting it be? Or, I mean, how do we change that? Yeah.
I'm not very good at a lot of stuff. Like, there are only a few things that I can do relatively well. And one of them is be able to take this material, understand it to some extent,
right,
and write about it and publish it. And Dark Light Consciousness is the most recent one. And I'm working on another book, of a book called Why Darkness Matters, in which I go into more into the sociological and political parts of this work. When we were talking earlier about Black consciousness, the African American, I call it, this Black consciousness coming into American consciousness through the fifth dimension,
right,
and reflecting the fifth dimension of light and the fifth dimension in physics and all of this stuff. that is what I'm writing about now. And again, like I said, there are only a few things I can do relatively well. So I'm staying with that and just getting it out during the time that I got left.
All right. Just to let the listeners know, we're talking to Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum in about 10 minutes. Raven will post the call-in numbers if you would like to call in and ask Dr. Bynum a question. You will be able to. 3 different numbers. Pay attention. There'll be a number for the West Coast, Midwest, and then there'll also be one for the East Coast. So just whatever geographical area you are close to that lines up with that number, that's the number you want to call. Or if you don't want to call, yes. Go ahead, Dr. Bynum.
Well, I was just saying, I hope people please do call, but I was just,
Yes.
An image came into my mind.
Yep.
And that was, as you're talking about the East Coast, the West Coast, the interior of the country, it's like the brain. We got the living dark matter, different parts of the brain, that they all start lighting up at the same time. They all start lighting up at the same time. I'm telling you, this black consciousness, this African consciousness, has been constantly changing this country, molding this country from the deepest level, from the earliest of days, and they're doing so again.
Yep.
American music, real American music, the deepest American music comes from an African source. We all know that.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
America really measures its ethical and and moral development by how it treats black people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
And so this is part of our teaching message, and it's painful at times. It's incredibly painful at times. Incredibly painful. But for whatever karmic reason, this is what we've done. We've chosen to do. So, those of our brothers and sisters who sold us on the coast of Africa to the European settlers, European traders, they were part of that too. So it's all very big and very confusing, much bigger than my mind can certainly understand. Mm-hmm. But at least I have enough to sense that there is an intelligence behind this, an intelligence, an unfoldment through time and through history. And we're going to get to the point one day where we look back upon this and we say, oh, of course, that was the way it was going to go. Mm-hmm. We can't see it now, though.
Right.
But everyone listening right now, deep down, you know this is true. And even though you may not be able to fully articulate it,
right,
you know that it's true, and you know you're part of a vast, vast, ancient continuum. It goes from way back ancient Egyptian days, West African days, early U.S. days, antebellum days, Reconstruction days, early 20th century days, all the Civil Rights Movement days, and now we're at this. And we're in another crest, another wave. So it's, on one level, it's very humbling, and another level, very exhilarating.
Right. Good point.
Because we carry the flag of human consciousness with us.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so we will be putting those numbers up in a few minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. Raven will put those numbers up. I had one more thing I wanted to discuss with you in that same chapter, because obviously you will piggyback.
Which one is it?
This is chapter 12, Other Methods for Awakening the Sleeping Serpent. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
You talk about, it's on page 283, you talk about a process that you put in this order. And if you could, especially the third part of it, if you could speak on the ascent, unfoldment, and on, there's many theories on the superconscious. I've heard many different breakdowns, but if you can explain in your study and research, the ascent, the unfoldment, and especially the superconscious.
Yes, as consciousness unfolds, and this, by the way, is based upon the observations of thousands of years among the ancient Kemetic Egyptians in the pyramid initiation rites, mm-hmm. and also on the banks of the Ganges by yogic Vedic seers. So this is not mine, but I'm just simply talking about what they observed and some of the things that I've experienced.
Sure.
As consciousness moved from the base of the body up through it, it awakens various levels of consciousness or awareness, and you become much more sensitive always there, but you just simply weren't aware of them. A crude is when you were 6 years old. Well, you were certainly intelligent, you were conscious, but you weren't conscious of the kind of things that you are today as an adult.
Right.
So
Correct.
you have to go through certain kinds of experiences, educationally, experientially, and so forth, and through family development, and so forth, to be able to understand certain kinds of things that you understand today that you could not have understood when you were 6 years old, even though you were intelligent, because your consciousness was not sufficiently evolved. Okay?
Right.
It had nothing to do with intelligence. It's just about evolution. Well, as that is a crude analogy, consciousness continues to evolve, and then when we reach a certain point of development, usually in the upper parts of the head, brain around the what's referred to as Ajna chakra, or it's associated with the pineal gland. There are lots of different ways to describe it. The point is, you reach a certain level, and then you begin to unfold in ways that are not totally, shall we say, controlled by thought. You're much more aware of yourself, not so much as a physical being, although you certainly are aware of yourself as a physical being, but you're also much more aware of yourself as a luminous being, or a being of light, or a dentist of a different dimension beyond the form that you're aware of, usually.
Right.
And you just become more and more conscious of that. And you're aware of it during the day when you meditate, when you pray, when you have a profound emotional experience with someone. You're aware of that periodically when you're sleeping and dreaming, and you're aware that, a certain phenomena are going on in your dreams, or you wake up and you've received a teaching in your dreams about something, or you've had a deep contact with an ancestral spirit, one kind or another, or some intelligent entity is you're aware is tutoring you, is teaching you, is leading you, and it doesn't feel alien or scary at all. It feels like this force has been with you for a long, long, long time. This is a continual unfoldment of your consciousness as a being of light, a luminous being.
Right.
And this is your birthright. This is your inheritance. And there are certain forces and resistances to understanding and accepting that. But it is certainly on the trajectory, and it is your ultimate form of liberation. No amount of material whatever is going to bring you the kind of radiant happiness and insight as this.
Correct.
You want to be here such that at that point, such that when you eventually get to the point where your physical vehicle is no longer capable of sustaining you, it's going to fall off. So this doesn't frighten you at all. And you see this as a stepping stone to a much more luminous kind of existence beyond this. And this is what the training was. This is what the explicit training in the pyramids of Giza. A lot of was they have the rite, R-I-T-E-S, of awakening the spirit out of the body by burying the person, quote unquote, burying the person alive in the sarcophagus, and they will be prepared by meditation, such that what they actually experienced was what we would describe today in clinical psychology and psychiatry as a form separated from the body. It's called the clinical dissociation.
Right.
Not a bad thing, except unless you're talking about psychiatry. The mind and the body separated, and the initiate had a clear, direct, unmistakable experiential validation that the soul exists. This is no longer theoretical. They knew it. And this is how they were initiated.
Right.
This is how they were initiated. And this is the further unfoldment of their consciousness. And for those very few who went even beyond that, they began and emerged into the higher levels of ascension. This is a great sign ancient science. Have been recently unearthed in the last 4 or 5 years, dozens of other pyramids along the Nile in Egypt.
That's correct.
There was a whole culture for thousands of years of initiation in these pyramids. These were not burial chambers for the ego of some pharaoh. That's Western propaganda.
Yep.
These were temples of initiation into the solar mysteries.
Mm.
A whole civilization for thousands of years. And now we've largely forgotten how to do it. And so when our elders become older and older, they begin to look like they're looking like they're having dementia and so forth, and we medicalize it, we have lost the sight of the fact that they are beginning to transition. They are beginning to transition out of this world, because they're no longer very clear about it, and beginning to translate into another world. They see ancestors, they see spirits. Their brain is not working very well, but their deeper selves are working in a way that we don't comprehend.
Right.
So we've over-medicalized it, you know? And but we have to rediscover the ancient sciences about that. And these sciences were known specifically in numbers in large areas in 2 places in the world. Ancient Egypt along the banks of the Nile, and in ancient India.
Mm.
They were known also in certain areas of South America. Yes, they were. And in Mesoamerica, yes, they were. But in large, organized ways in ancient Kemetic Egypt and in Dravidian India. Yes, they have extensive texts to write about it.
Mm.
So when you're reading, all of you listening out there, when you're reading some edition of the, quote, Egyptian Book of the Dead, unquote, remember that you're reading a highly edited and very often distorted interpretation of phenomena.
Correct.
These are not illusions and hallucinations. These were epiphanies and realization.
Mm.
The ancient Egyptians referred to as you are dying, identifying with, quote, the light bird, unquote. Well, in near-death experiences, medical near-death experiences, a person meets a being of enormous light.
Mm.
Okay.
Correct.
In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, in the Bardo Thodol, it's called, the whole psychology is not to run away from or avoid that, but to merge with that being, that luminous being, because that is your true nature. And
Right.
it's beyond individuality. The ancient Kemetic Egyptians were doing it. They were doing it in ancient India and Tibet.
Right.
And you want to learn how to do that. We have to rediscover that. And it's not going to be rediscovered in some clinic at Harvard or Yale or Tufts University. No. That has to be rediscovered among the peoples that it was discovered by.
Right.
Okay? So this is your birthright. I keep saying that because I want you to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
This is your birthright. Don't let anybody talk you out of it.
Mm. Right. Good point. All right. So the call-in numbers are up. If you got questions and you're in the chat, you want to ask a question in the chat, I'll give everybody a minute. You could do that too. You see the numbers for Eastern time zone, 646-558-8656. Right below that is Central, using the Houston time zone, 346-248-7799. Again, it's all in the chat. I'm not expecting you to remember it. And then for standard time zone number is right there below that, 253-215-8782. If you would like to call in and join the conversation, you can do that now. And I will also look for questions in the chat. So I'll wait for that and I'll keep talking with Dr. Bynum. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you, Dr. Bynum, you mentioned, and I kind of know I want to elaborate, but to bring something up you just touched on a minute ago about more pyramids being outside of what we know, what they call Egypt today, especially when you go into Aswan, Sudan, and Nubia. Why is that not talked about? Why don't they want to draw attention to the fact that when you go up into those regions in North Africa, and Egypt is Africa, but I'm just saying, it's not talked about. No attention is drawn to that.
Well, let me put it this way. Up until after the fall of the Roman Empire, and following after the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe went into, quote, the Dark Ages, unquote. And then after 500 years, they came out to, quote, the Renaissance or reawakening. Okay? During that reawakening, the Europeans were looking around in the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th century, all the way up to the 17th century, for models of what illumination and enlightenment were.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And they discovered that much of their civilization arose out of ancient Egypt. And so they really emulated things that came out of ancient Egypt. They built many of the temples in their cities. Paris and London would have obelisks and all these things. They really got into it. Then Napoleon invaded Egypt. I think it was in the early 18th century, late 17th, early 18th century, invaded Egypt to the land where all of their classical antiquities were based. And they got there and they discovered, my God, they're just Africans here.
Right.
Oh my God. we can't have that because they had African slavery.
Correct.
So how could they have a civilization based upon the people that they enslaved? So all of a sudden, intellectually and everything else, it was no longer ancient Egypt. It became ancient Greece and Rome. Okay? And that was able to be digested. But why did I say that long story? My thought is that part of the reason that they don't talk about it in Nubia and the Sudan is because those are unequivocally black African world. And to acknowledge that the roots of ancient science, which means mathematics, astronomy, chemistry, all of them are rooted there, is to undermine white hegemony. It is. It's subtle, but it's there. Now, for sure, there are many people, including white people, quote unquote, who see through that craziness and are doing all they can to change that around. Particularly people like Martin Boval and other anthropologists, Hancock, written many books about prophecy, Mayan code. They clearly acknowledge the African roots of all of this. I'm not talking about the Africans who came into prominence after the invasion from Arabia in the 7th century. Because today many people think those are who the Egyptians were. No, they were not. The ancient Egyptians, Kemetic Egyptians, were the ones who looked like the Sphinx. And if you look at the Sphinx, that is not a Caucasian.
Right.
That is not a Semite.
Correct.
That is an indigenous. And it's still, even this day, 2020, it's still unsettling for many people. But then again, we elected Trump as president. So we know that consciousness goes very deep. But I want you to hear that it's crumbling. It really is crumbling, and it's crumbling fast.
Yep.
Okay? And this new wave is coming in, and it is a very welcoming, empathic wave, a compassionate one, enrolls all people, because you can get all peoples, all genetic roots of people out of the African template, but you can't get all peoples out of the European template or out of the Asian one. It just genetically doesn't work. It's the African one, because that is the basis of all of this. And so that's why we get back to the African unconscious.
Right.
It is genetically, historically, archaeologically, seriologically, the root of our species, Homo sapiens sapiens. And that is what we've been talking about. And God willing, that is what I'll continue to talk about until breath leaves my body.
Yep. Good point. Now, something I want to back up to, because you were just talking, just to kind of piggyback off of what we were talking about. Explain to people that, and believe it or not, there are people, I'm not saying maybe listeners of this show, but there are people out there who really can't decipher the difference when we talk about the pre-dynastic Egyptians and what I think they try to spoon feed us all the time, the Hyksos dynasties, which is what white mainstream America likes to teach as Egypt. Can you kind of explain so people have an understanding there is a difference?
Yes, there is a difference, major difference, important difference, historical and genetic.
Right.
The earliest, well, let's put it this way. The earliest dynasties of ancient Egypt that nobody really quarrels about are beginning around 33 to 3,400 years BCE, before the Common Era, and that was when a pharaoh named Mini, united Upper and Lower Egypt, and he was unquestionably a Sudanese and African. Okay, and then during that time, after that, you had several different dynasties that we know of for absolutely sure. And finally, around 1200 or so BC, so there's that's going on there. You have the beginning decline of Egypt around 1200 to 1000 BC.
Right.
And then after that, you begin to have invasion of different peoples coming from the Middle East into Egypt. One of the major ones were the Hyksos. They were Semitic people. And then you had a number, you had Persians. You had a number of different non-indigenous Egyptian peoples coming in and conquered Egypt, because Egypt was in decline after about 1200 BC. 1200 BC is when Moses was there. Moses and the Israelites were brought into Egypt. They were conquered peoples under, I forget his name right now, but one of the pharaohs. And they were in Egypt, I think, for like 300 years. And then they had a radical black Egyptian priest named Moses, who led them out. And then after, started going into over hundreds and hundreds of years into decline, Hyksos and so on and so forth. Those are the Semitic people. But prior to that, Egypt was primarily an African thing. So all during the quote Pyramid Age, it was indigenous Egyptians, Sudanese Egyptians. Now, but before the so-called dynastic age that we know about, there were about 12,000 years of the rule in Egypt by legendary kings. And we have their names.
Right.
Who ruled Egypt. And then there were dynasties before that were even further back. Okay? So if you take the Egyptians, what the Egyptians say about themselves, not what the Europeans say about what the Egyptians say, but what the Egyptians said about the Egyptians, they trace their history back to at least 25,000 years before Christ, 25,000 years. Enough time for civilization to fall many times. And when you listen to read their accounts of it, they were in contact not only with the peoples of different parts of the earth, contact with consciousnesses that were not even of the earth. That's a whole different show. But that's what they say.
Right.
That's what they say about themselves.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's excellent.
So do you believe what somebody says about themselves, or do you believe what you think about?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've seen this over the years. That's what they do with history, especially with Egypt. And it's always this focus in modern day time where, they make Egypt look like it's part of the Middle East, which that's always been comical. They never talk about the greatness of what was, called at that time Nubia, Naphtha Playa, different terms that was used. And that's really where the Egyptian culture proceeded from, but it's just not talked about.
Right.
Yeah. It's just.
Well, it's good old fashioned racism.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, but even in the year 2020, now it's true, the Egyptologists of today are not the Egyptologists of the 18th century or even the 20th century. That's early part of the 20th century. They're much more sophisticated now. And if you look closely at the differences between what National Geographic used to do 30 years ago and what they do today, you'll notice the ancient Egyptians are Africans now.
Right.
Whereas 30 years ago, they were essentially, they looked like Europeans.
Correct.
But they were not. And we know that.
Correct.
So it's moving, it's slow, but it's moving along. It's moving along.
Yeah.
And so I'm just asking everybody to do whatever they can do intellectually, honestly, to bring this along. Because, the fact that we're talking about this means that the word is spreading. And I hope people will talk about it with their friends and their relatives, and because it's by osmosis, this is how this happens. And the whole thing, one of the reasons that we were able to turn this book into an audio book is because so many more people are catching on to it. And this way they can sit in their car, like I said, on a long trip and listen. Or they can listen for an hour a day, and then get out of their car, go do what they're going to do, and get back in and listen again, and digest it over time. But that's how it was written. It was written to be digested because I wanted to put this on a sound, clear, scientific, and clinical basis so that we're not just walking off feeling good about ourselves. Another book about uplift. No. This is about transformation.
Correct.
This is about transformation.
And I'm just putting the meeting ID. We have somebody trying to call in. I'm going to get that meeting ID in there. Hold on one sec. Let me get that in there. Because people are trying to call in and we did not put the meeting ID. We're going to do that right now. Hold on one sec. All right, I just pasted the meeting ID. So when you call in, that meeting ID you see at the bottom, it's going to ask you that. You can just go ahead and there it is right there. We'll be able to take your call. I apologize. Didn't realize we had to put that in there. Yeah, but that's good points, Dr. Bynum. And like you say, things definitely are changing. I feel like it's just weird. I know it's happening, a lot of stuff that's happening now. I've always felt like, this has been there. I've never felt disconnected from it. I know not everybody's going to feel, the same way. But this is what I was saying earlier, in my opinion, has to change. Now, I know here in the West, and especially, when we're raised in this American culture, it's hard to get across to some people certain levels of information because, let's be honest, they have a Eurocentric way of thinking because we've been spoon a lot of the religions. And again, it's not, if that's your path, that's your path. But I think this leads to some of the issues why we can't, connect, in my opinion, with certain people. So,
Well, I agree, and I would simply suggest that, say for folks who may have their spiritual intuition, their spiritual discipline is a Christian one, that's perfectly okay with me. All I ask is you go back to the roots.
Right.
You go back to the roots. In the first 100 years after Christianity, when the great texts were written, they were written by the desert fathers in Egypt and Africa.
Correct.
They weren't written in England.
Correct.
They were written in Africa. The great scholar, St. Augustine, he was an African scholar.
Correct.
In Socrates, he talked about the great principles of the mind. These came out of African ideas and African texts. The idea of the unconscious, Freud and Jung, those are all African understandings and intuitions and insight. So if that's your intuition, great. Back to the source. That's all I'm asking.
Right.
That's all I'm asking. Just go back to the source. You'll be fine, and there won't be any contradiction. There's nothing to be afraid of. There is nothing to be afraid of.
Correct. Good point. Other thing I want to ask you, while I'm trying to get this phone, I'm having little issues with the meeting. Let's see if this works. But one thing I wanted to also ask you too while we're waiting. This is on page 154, and I know on a previous show we briefly touched on this. And I'm big on this and dealing and talking with people. I know you touched a little bit on it earlier with the chakras, but on page 154 and 155. And I like to ask you this question. I've asked you it one time before in the past, being obviously a doctor. And I don't think people consider mental health enough sometimes when they're on this path. Talk a little bit about, there are dangers that can happen. You talk about that, dangers and delusions on the path. But from a mental, medical perspective, what should we be aware of as we're traveling this path? And I don't think this is talked about enough.
Well, one of them that's dangerous and it's operative at the very moment, actually, but also historically, is that from time to time there are individuals, either locally or even at a national level, who have, through their own insight or blind ability or simply been born with it, their energy is already largely awakened. It has not been highly evolved and developed, but it's awakened. And they have the capacity to move people because their energy is infectious. They have a lot of what's called charisma. Okay? Well, when they go into the political arena, depending on what their agenda is, they can use that capacity to stimulate other people for good, for better or worse. You listen to a speech by, say, in a benevolent way, you listen to a speech by Martin Luther King. He had the ability, he had the charismatic ability, because the energy was in him, to move large numbers of people and to do primarily good things. And he was aware of it too. He may not have used these terms, but he was aware of the force of Christ, of Jesus with him. And he used it to transform society in a nonviolent way.
Right.
Well, there are others who have the same capacity, but they use it to hoard power. Mm. One of those figures was Adolf Hitler. If you've ever looked at him giving a speech, even though you're not obviously following his speech, you can steal the power. Mm-hmm. You can steal it. He had the capacity to awaken that in people and lead them down a dark path. Right. Okay? Gotcha. Those folks have that energy awakened in them. And you know it is when people will do it and they can't see the person doing anything evil or wrong. Right. It becomes a cult. Yep. Oh, it becomes a cult. Oh, yeah. I would go so far as to say that the people around Trump, particularly his court, it's a cult. It is. Yep. It's a cult. They can't see him doing anything wrong. They see him as a messenger of God. And he can lie. He can lie, be caught in lies multiple times. Yeah. He can be clearly breaking all kinds of moral and ethical codes. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Because he's awakened the energy around them. Mm-hmm. See people in his entourage, not those who close follow him, but the people who come to his rallies and stuff. They are really moved by it. Mm-hmm. Because he awakens the energy in them. Yeah. That's the trick. He can awaken the energy in them. Right. Martin Luther King could do it. Yep. Hitler could do it. Very powerful people, usually male. Yeah. Do it. Okay? Yeah. So when you find that you're following adulation, a political leader, and you can't see them doing anything wrong, That's how you know you're in the midst of a cult.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
That's how you know.
We do have a caller for you, Dr. Bynum. So let me bring this caller in. So I'm gonna bring caller 95 from last four numbers 8644. Caller, you're on the air.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead, brother. You're on the air. You're talking to Dr. Bynum.
How's it going, Brother Beniti?
Good.
How's it going, Dr. Bynum?
Yes.
Yes, I have a series of questions. But first of all, I want to caveat on what you were talking about with Trump. In the book of Revelations, it says it's going to blow the trumpets. Right now, we have Trump Pence in the office right now. So I'm like, okay, this seems kind of coincidental that these two guys are in office at this time right now.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
It's not a question. It was just basically, I was saying it's a coincidence how the Bible was talking about, like in the book of Revelations, how there's going to be 7 trumpets blowing at the end or something like that. And now we have Trump Pence in the office, Trump and Pence. It sounds like trumpet.
Yes, I see what you're saying.
He's
Yeah.
making it
Well, I'm hoping that we are sufficiently conscious enough to change our future, because it talks about the Book of Revelation talks about the Armageddon and the final days, and I hope that is not the case. I hope that we are able to shift and go in a different direction, that we don't go toward Armageddon, because I shudder to think of what that would mean for our species and our world. I don't think it's going to happen. I think the countervailing forces that will not let that happen. If you've been following, and I have, you've been following development among military, and these aren't big liberals, by the way. The people in the military-industrial complex in this country and in the higher reaches of government, they have signaled. This is several former secretaries of defense, former joint chiefs of staff, and a number of other people in the government. They are not going to simply go willy-nilly down a path and let him take us over the edge. They are not going to allow him to totally bypass the Constitution of the United States. They have come out and said publicly, listen to them, that they support the Constitution. They took an oath to the Constitution of the United States, not to the President of the United States.
Right.
So they're signaling in some way
Yes.
if they're not going to go along with a state of martial law. He may try it. I think he's trying it right now. Actually,
Yeah,
he's going
he
to
is.
Portland. I do.
It's not going to happen. I was in the Army recently. I got 16, and I found out there's a shit ton of militias out there. And really, if martial law is going to go on, how would a soldier come down to Florida? Because I'm in Florida right now. I'm in West Palm. How would a soldier come down and start shooting and killing or enacting all these crazy things when there's another soldier in Arkansas where his hometown is going to do the same thing? No, we're not going to do that to each other. The military isn't going to allow that to happen.
I agree. They're not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because it's against the American dream. 1, 2, he doesn't have enough support. There aren't enough people who are willing to destroy the country for him. And 3, there are a lot of militias out there, but there are also a number of trained black militia out there. And the country want to go down that road. It ain't worth it.
Nope, it's not.
It's not worth it.
And by the way, he threatened New York today again, Governor Cuomo, bring in federal troops there if he doesn't get a hold of the crime wave in New York. He did that today.
Right. And the governor of Oregon has said, we don't want them here. And I'm sure Cuomo said the same thing. So people are resisting. people are finally, reluctantly taking a stand. I think even some of these quote-unquote conservatives don't want to go down that path because they can't win it.
Oh no.
They can't win a civil war. Cannot do it. They don't want to go back and relitigate the Civil War. And I'm not talking about these being liberals. I'm talking about, they want to preserve their institutions. They want to preserve their wealth. They want to preserve order. And they will sacrifice Mr. Trump.
Oh yeah, it's too much people with guns and common sense. And if you look at America, everybody, if you go to Slovakia, in Jakarta, India, any other third world country or whatever, their main dream, or if they get asked where do we want to go before you die, is America. If they see America falling down, I think the whole world will go apart.
I don't know if it'll fall apart, but we've already come down in status around the world. I think we can get it.
Yeah.
Trump humiliated and denigrated us in front of the world and humiliated us and embarrassed us. The military-industrial complex, his main people, I mean not his, but the main establishment is not behind this guy doing this. They're not.
Nope.
CIA
Nope.
is not. The FBI is not behind him. The National Security Administration is not behind him. So he's going to try and do this. He's trying right now. But I think if we start blowing up, he might have an accident. Who knows? Stuff happens. So it happens.
Just like the New World Order cards, there's going to be an assassination, just like how they had on The Simpsons. They're going to have to take them out.
Something will happen, and there's already a provision in the Constitution for when somebody becomes mentally unstable, and they, I think it's the 24th Amendment, 23rd, 24th Amendment, and they might have to reluctantly do that. But he's clearly emotionally unstable. Clearly emotionally unstable. Not to be a psychologist.
Yeah.
So
but I just don't think the military-industrial complex, its brass and others are willing to destroy the country with this guy.
So Dr. Bynum, let me ask you guys a question. Dr. Bynum, I already, it's just something I've been sensing even before this pandemic. I feel, what is the constitutional law if he feels as if the election results are not legit, he loses, can he suspend the Constitution and try to hold his ground there?
No.
He can try, but that won't go. That won't go with the national government people. That won't go over with the NSA, the FBI, or the CIA. Won't go, and even the Supreme Court won't go for that one. So he's isolated. He's not a deep thinker. He reacts. But we may see an ugly few weeks. Yeah, I think we could do that, but I don't think ultimately the country is not prepared to sacrifice itself for this guy.
Right.
Don't think it is.
Gotcha.
Just don't think it is. We don't have to, wish him ill or wish something bad to happen to him. No. The structure in place for over 200 years in this country says no to that kind of stuff. We fought a civil war, and we still had an election during the Civil War. Okay? So, no.
Gotcha.
I don't think that's going to happen.
All right. Brother, you got any other questions for Dr. Bynum?
Okay. I have another question. I talked with you about the Kundalini thing on the other program a few days ago about the energy going up my spine, and then it exploded through my heart and left a warm liquid. You told me about the serpent energy, right? So I had another meditation that happened with me. I was laying on the floor, and all of a sudden it felt like somebody had a hair blow dryer and was just pressing it on like very, very high speed, and it felt like a tornado was leaving my third eye and going up to the universe. That was just very wild. I was like, wow. I felt like I was getting connected with every aspect of myself at that time.
Well, these are kind of phenomena that do happen, and I would suggest that if this is what's going on for you, that you might want to look into some work on what's called pranayama. It's a breath control, because you might find that your energy is coming up through one of the channels that you may need to quiet it down and make it come up the central canal. There are two channels. There's one on the right side and one on the left side. One's called Ida, one's called Pingala. And cross over. And if you go up one, it becomes, it feels like an electrical charge and like you're burning yourself out. And the other one, you feel sometimes extremely cold. And so you want to balance by quieting both of those and go up the central canal. And that's a technical issue. That's a technical issue. So I would read some book on Kundalini yoga. And there are some good texts out there, by the way.
Yes.
Will help you technically, purely technically, bring that into line so that much by, and so that things feel much more balanced. Because you don't want to get into a place where it may be super intense, but it feels totally out of control. Because that's no fun.
Yeah, because before I did the meditation, I did something called holotropic breathing, and then I got into the meditation, and then that's when things got really intense. So yes, the breathing techniques work very well, and that was like one of the first times I had one of those experiences. Yes, and I am aware of that technique, and it's extremely powerful. So you may want to add two other things to that. One is alternate nostril breathing for about 5 minutes, where you breathe out of one nostril at a time, back and forth slowly for 5 minutes or so. You might want to focus your attention to the top of your nose. You keep it there for a little bit so that you come up the right channel. Okay, because that breathing technique you talk about is very powerful, very real. But it doesn't ultimately do you good. Have so much energy coming through your system that it burns it out. Remember we were talking earlier about an electrical wire? Well, it doesn't do you any good to put 300 watts through a 60-watt bulb. Okay? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Right. Hey, is it all right if I ask another question?
Yeah, you'd ask a few more minutes, and then
okay.
Wrap it up. Go ahead, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so when I had that thing, when my Kundalini started rising from the base of my spine and it shot through my heart and left that warm liquid over my heart, it just serenaded my heart. I was wondering, why didn't the Kundalini go through my throat, through my third eye, through my crown? I'm like, was there any blockages? Because I know my third eye was already working, lucid dreaming, astral projection already. So I'm like, why didn't I feel that energy surge up all the way through my crown at that time when that Kundalini rose?
I'm not sure. I don't know you well enough to be able to say precisely why, but that is the general pathway. Okay? But I know if it's surging like that, and you don't feel like you got any control over it, that you need to bring some wholesome discipline to that. Again, it doesn't do you any good to bring 300 watts through a 60-watt bulb.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about earlier. About when we were talking a little moving energy and some of the dangers of it, and how it cannot always be pleasant.
Right.
That's
The discipline of the Urias, of the Kundalini, is a discipline, a highly organized discipline that was pretty close to perfected by the ancient Kemetic Egyptians and the Dravidians and the Indo-Aryans of northern India later. So, and their goal was not to burn you out, but theirs was to bring it up in a steady way, a balanced way, so that it brought you through to the apex and you were able to rest in the living current. Right. It was not about to burn you out.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you guys so much, man.
We appreciate
Good
you.
Talking to you.
Thanks for calling in, brother. Appreciate it. I'm going to give anybody last opportunity. We pretty much only have a couple of minutes. We had up to 40 people in here, and I'm surprised we don't have more questions. I guess everybody's just Everybody wants to
all
listen.
All I would want to say is that I know that reading some of the material can be very demanding, and part of that is that I wanted to be very thorough about certain kind of medical and clinical stuff so that it's on a firm foundation. But by listening to it, you can listen for half an hour, turn it off, digest it, go walk around, do something else, and your mind will digest it. And then you come back and then you go a little bit further the next day or something like that. And that's one of the advantages of it being on audio. You know,
Right.
You can go at your own speed and you can share it with other people and that sort of thing. And that's what I'm hoping to happen. Because again, because of this program, Universal Minds and some others, the word is spreading and it's going at a good pace, and people are coming out and no longer afraid to talk about these things and to experience them. So if you can talk about it, experience it, and share your experience with other people, so
Right.
that you don't go out so far out on a limb that you can't get your way back.
Right.
That's the best way to go. So that,
I agree.
It's not in your head, but it's confirmed consensual validation. It's called by other people.
Right.
That's the best way. The pyramids, you weren't in there by yourself. You were in there with other people.
You're right. And this book, and I can tell you this, what you just said is spot on. It seems like every time I go back to the Dark Light Consciousness book, it's one of those books you see something you didn't see the first time. Don't ask me why. I always go back in there and I say, how did I not see that after reading through it a couple of times already? It just seems like there's always something you do. It is the type of read you got to take the time to ingest it. I 100% agree. That's why I think the audio book is a good thing. And as I told you earlier, Dr. Bynum, we do have some people, as the show was going on, actually got the audio book. So I think that's a great thing especially for this. I believe you got to constantly study. It's one of those type of books. There's just yeah.
Yeah, and it'll be much more organized than I've been able to be tonight.
Oh, no.
We've been answering the questions, but it'll be much more organized, and you'll be able to follow it. And hopefully, I've done my homework, and it's spot on for you.
Yep. All right. Well, listen, Dr. Bynum, I appreciate it as usual. I appreciate you taking the time, spend a couple hours with us. I know the listeners do. We'll be definitely touching base again. We'll get you back here again. I know at some point for sure. So is there anything I know you kind of just summed it up. Is there any last words you want to say or anything you want to add before we?
I just want to thank you, and I want to thank your listeners and folks that are awakening with everybody else.
All right. Again, as always, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do. I know personally you've had an impact on me and many of the other listeners. So, take care of yourself. Be safe. We'll talk soon.
Thank you very much. You have a decent night.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Bynum.
Good night.
All right. Okay. We are going to close. Again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Wish you guys would have had a little bit more questions. That's the objective, bringing some of these guests on. So I'm not sure if you guys are twiddling your damn thumbs or what it is you're doing. But anyway, we can't ask courage. Okay. But again, want to thank everybody for tuning in. I know we don't usually do this on a Monday. If you missed it, go back. Again, I've talked about this book many times. Okay. Get you this book. If you want to deal with Africa, my thoughts on some of it. To me, hands down, Bynum, it tackles African spirituality from a scientific aspect. In my opinion, it's just my opinion. Personally, to me, he is the authoritative teacher on it. That's just my opinion. Because he takes all the fluff. There's no fluff in this book. That's what I like about this book. Even though Dr. Bynum, quote unquote, well, he has experience in left-hand path tantra through the Dravidians. He was actually initiated in that. You'll read that in the book. He may not be technically, full left-hand path occult on the path like we are, but his knowledge is universal. It doesn't matter. When you read the book, there are a lot of concepts and spiritual practices in there that apply to our path and really can apply to a multitude of paths. But for sure, 100%, he's on point. He knows his shit. And again, from his experience traveling the world, and that's one of the other reasons, and this is not a knock on anybody else. We have a lot of people who, they're book readers and they lay claim to cultures and paths, and they really haven't traveled the world. They really haven't experienced the culture. I was fortunate to some of these paths to experience it myself too, which is different than reading about it. Obviously not on the level that Dr. Bynum has traveled. I haven't traveled that level. But he's speaking from, he's traveled to all parts of Africa. He's been initiated in voodoo. He's very knowledgeable about left-hand path tantra, Vama Marga, dealing with what we know as the, modern day Dravidian culture, or the Hindus. I'm familiar with this. I think if you're looking for, people always ask me what's a good book to build a foundation on, whether it comes to this path in general. This is one of the books I also always recommend to people, because this is your foundation. And again, it doesn't matter, what you gravitate personally to on this path. It's a universal tone, if you want to say, because everything we deal with is pretty much in there. I hope people caught the part. Before I go, just a couple quick things. What he was saying about the objective and the subjective light, and he was basically what we talk about on this path all the time. You got to be able to bridge the harmony between both. Okay. He talks about the breakdown of your subjective objective consciousness through that light, and you must go into that darkness to get that light, right? That's the intellect that we talk about this path. He was just breaking it down from a more scientific aspect, not per se just how we break it down with the science, but we liken it to the path, or might use terminology in accordance with the path that we're talking about. He was breaking, if you pay attention to what he was talking about tonight, he was breaking it down on a universal level, but he was breaking down exactly how one perceives magic, the functioning of the mind. When I asked him to break down, your multi-dimensional, being a multi-dimensional being and multi-dimensional consciousness, this all is in line with what we do. Okay, can you stop? Are you making a pizza or something? But this is what we need to have this understanding. Okay, if you really want to understand and remove, this is what I'm talking about. And one thing I didn't get a chance to ask him that he's talked about in the past, not being stuck in the past, being able to take these ancient sciences and information and bring it up to date and apply it in 2020. And as I've said many times before, I think one of the huge problems is a lot of us get stuck like Chuck, and we get caught up in the tangibles of this. We want to, put on Egyptian clothing, which is fine. I'm not saying you can't, but I think we get caught up in being stuck in the past. And this book shows you how to use that information in real time and use it now. Okay, that's what it does. It shows you how to do all that stuff. The problem that I think tends to happen with some of us, I call it having a living in the past syndrome. Unfortunately, this happens. Okay, and this is something I think we need to change the way that we think. We definitely need to be able to understand if we have the ability to apply this today, we need to do it. Okay. Hold on one second. This thing just froze on me. Okay. Yeah, if we have that ability to do this today, we need to actually do it, and again, not talk about it. Okay. So anyway, if you don't have the book, get the book. Okay. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we will see you guys soon. Hold on one second. What happened here? All right. So we will, further blessings to all, and we will talk.